Who's ready for more legal stuff in the book of Exodus? I know I am. Exodus 23 and 1. You shall not repeat or raise a false report. You shall not join with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. What we are looking at here is defamation and gossip. So we have two parts. We have the person that is making the initial false report, and then we got the people that would spread that false report. So the first case, you got the guy or whatever, maybe he doesn't like his neighbor, doesn't like somebody, makes up some sort of story about him and tells other people, maybe takes it to the judges, tries to get him into trouble or make him look bad, lose face, whatever, what have you. And then we have the people that get this false report and they got the opportunity. It's like, hey man, did you do this? And the guy's like, no. And then end it right there. Or they can just blindly pass that information on. And that gossip can be incredibly damaging and hurtful, especially in a time of vulnerability. One of the old Bible study teachers I used to watch his videos for, he talked about gossip and just how painful it was when he was going through a bankruptcy or whatever, and it's like everybody in the church or this like group in the church or whatever, they were all talking about his circumstance and situation, but no one came to him to ask what was going on, if things were okay, what's gonna happen, right? And he just felt incredibly betrayed by that, and that's just not something you want to do. It's not something you want to be a part of. Don't be the person spreading the gossip. Even if it seems innocent, it can be incredibly painful. Exodus 23 and 2. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you bear witness at a trial, so as to side with a multitude to pervert justice. Reading this verse, it really reminded me of World War II, when we had the Germans who were on trial for the Holocaust scenario and war crimes, and the defense was, I was just following orders. It probably doesn't need to be quite that extreme. I imagine too this would apply if you were at, like, say, a company and they were doing something unethical that was potentially damaging to the environment or society in general, maybe toxic chemicals or something, that maybe you need to be the whistleblower and stand up to the problems that they're causing. And even more trivial, non-important things as well, just not being of that character, to being persuaded into doing evil. For doing evil is never good. The second half of this line deals with the idea of being a witness in a trial. So they call you to the stand, so to say. When you're giving your testimony, the testimony has to be the truth and not what the multitude desires. Be that a multitude as in a large group of people, or multitude as in the people who have the power. Exodus 23 and 3. Neither shall you be partial to a poor man in his trial, just because he is poor. This is certainly a tough verse. I think many of us would agree that we would want to give additional mercy to someone that is in a rough circumstance versus somebody that is very wealthy in power and doesn't really need that mercy. But for justice to be justice, it must be impartial and treated the same to everyone. Exodus 23 and 4. If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. It's to be expected that if this was a donkey of a friend, or maybe even a neutral party, an acquaintance, there would be no question as to the idea of returning it. But seeing as it is an enemy's, that makes this kind of more interesting, doesn't it? I don't think God really wants people to be enemies to one another, especially here in Exodus. We're probably referring to one Israelite to another Israelite in the same area. The idea of being a community and looking after each other inside the community. And depending on the circumstances to why that guy would be considered an enemy, maybe it'll be water under the bridge. If you bring his ox back to him, he'll be thankful, and maybe that will mend or repair some of the relationship. Whereas if you saw it and didn't return it, that would just be adding fuel to the fire. Oh man, I can't wait to get to the New Testament when we get to the idea of the doing to others as they have them do unto you, and all the stuff about love thy enemy. Oh man, oh, it gets so good. There's so much like build up and foreshadowing built into here, even in the law. It's just so incredible to see. Exodus 23 and 5. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under his load, you shall refrain from leaving the man to cope with it alone. You shall help him to release the animal. So the donkey is overburdened. It has too many packs on it, too much weight. The straw that broke the camel's back, so to say. It has too much weight on it. It can't move anymore. It's way too encumbered. The owner of the donkey, he's trying to get the packs off. He's struggling with it. Having the ability to help him, that would be the right thing to do. Help the man lower the burden on the animal. Similar to the last one, if this was a friend, there would be no question that aid would be provided. But due to this being an enemy, hesitation may be a thing. But here we have it commanded as a rule made by God to help this man. Many places have Good Samaritan type laws now where it's if you see someone like fall off a bike and maybe they're not looking so good, that you need to render aid or check on them, make sure everything's okay, maybe call an ambulance if needed. So a lot of it is kind of similar to that idea, not to look the other way and walk past. But Exodus 23 and 6, you shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his cause. This just kind of reminds me of the Miranda rights when they talk about you have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford an attorney will be provided for you. I don't know if that's actually what the correct wording is of it or whatever, but the idea is that everybody should be able to receive the law, and the law should not just be something of the rich and powerful, and people that don't have the ability to pay, well, guess what? You're going to be screwed over. There's also things like small claims courts that provide the same kind of idea as well. Law for smaller matters. Exodus 23 and 7. Keep far from a false matter, and be very careful not to condemn to death the innocent and the righteous. For I will not justify and acquit the wicked. The application of the law is not an easy thing to do. There is a lot that can go wrong when it's misapplied, and the innocent receives the sentence of the guilty, even though they are innocent. They were not guilty of it, but for whatever reason the court system failed, and you have an innocent person receiving the punishment of the guilty. So this is a call of due diligence, and God asking for people to try their best to prevent this from happening. So here we have the opposite, where we have a guilty person being released as if they were innocent. They got acquitted of the charges. God's not going to use that as a justification for forgiving that action. He knows the truth. Exodus 23 and 8. You shall take no bribe, for the bribe binds those who have sight and perverts the testimony and the cause of the righteous. So here we have a fight against the corruption, the bribe. It corrupts people. I really like the wording on this too. Blinds those who have sight. I guess you pay them money and they look the other way. Then we have perverts the testimony and the cause of the righteous. So we have the bribe acting as a method of changing the testimony. And as it changes the testimony, it perverts the testimony. And this hurts the cause of the righteous. How can you have a righteous state if you have corruption in it? Something I've always found fascinating about the country of Singapore is that they like to pay their political people very well, much more than in other countries. And they do this as a method to try to reduce the amount of corruption. For if the needs are all looked after, They're less likely to take bribes from other groups or people. Whereas in other countries, the way you look at it is most of your salary comes from the bribes that you receive and not what you're paid from your stipend from the actual government or the people. And that is just crazy. Exodus 23 and 9. Also you shall not oppress a temporary resident, for you know the heart of a stranger and sojourner, seeing you were strangers and sojourners in Egypt. We see a lot of verses very similar to this one, so it must be something important. We do know that throughout the book of Genesis, most of the guys from Abraham onward, they're all wandering. They're all getting to the land at some point, maybe, and then they're dwelling there temporarily, and then they gotta leave. There's a famine, there's a whatever, and they just spent 500 years down in Egypt because of the famine that was there. So they're kind of wanderers, not really being in the land that is designated for them. And so God wants them to have compassion on those that are wandering, because that's the position they used to be in, and they have received a lot of mercy from the people around them. Egypt at the end there, they were very harsh, but there was a time when Egypt was good and they were treating the Israelites very well. Relations just soured at the end there. Exodus 23 and 10. 6 years shall you sow your land and reap its yield. 23:11. But the 7th year you shall release it and let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat whatever the land voluntarily yields, and what they leave the wild beast shall eat. In like manner you shall deal with your vineyards and olive grove. So here we have the Sabbath of the land. We had the Sabbath, taking the day off in the week. Now we have the idea of the land being permitted to rest for a year. So with 6 years, they plant, they grow, they harvest all the crops or whatever. Then on the 7th year, that land is allowed to rest, and anything that grows on it, the poor people can come and they can gather and they can have that to sustain themselves. And then whatever is left over, the animals will eat. Something to keep in mind that this is not necessarily in sync. So a farmer could have more than one field, and a portion could be in the Sabbath every year, right? You could have like a kind of a crop rotation where you have multiple fields, and then there's always a section that will be kind of resting. And different farmers will have their fields at different times so that their Sabbaths don't all align, so there'll always be food available for the poor. There's a lot of benefit to doing this kind of style of crop rotation. That year when nothing is planted, the ground is resting, stuff will grow and then it will die and then it will rot, and then when the field is tilled the next year, a lot of that rotten stuff will be able to be placed back in the ground, and will give extra nutrients and kind of boost it up a little bit so that they'll get more yield out of the 6 years than if they were to run it 7 years in a row. So it probably works out pretty good in the end anyway. There are a lot of places in the world. I think of the Boer War, where you had all this like industrialized farming, and it just took the life out of the land, and now nothing grows very well in that location. So there is something to be said about this, and I think it can be proven scientifically that there is a benefit to this system of crop rotation. Exodus 23 and 12. 6 days shall you do your work, but the 7th day you shall rest and keep Sabbath, that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your bondwoman and the alien may be refreshed. So this is a repeat of what we saw previously within the Ten Commandments section. The idea of the Sabbath, working for the 6 days and taking the 7th day off, and expanding it to the point that it's not just you, it's not just your family, but even the people that work under you and the animals that work under you, that everybody deserves time off. Exodus 23 and 13. In all I have said to you take heed. Do not mention the name of other gods, either in blessing or cursing. Do not let such speech be heard from your mouth. Well, that is certainly very interesting. And I think the English language, we have a lot of words that would violate that. An apology, where does the word apology come from? Well, it comes from Apollo, the Greek god. So there's a lot of words like that in English that are probably not good to be spoken of. That's just something to think about. But there's this idea to purge the demons and the ungodly and these idols and the idolatry of not even speaking the name of them, to not even bring them into your mouth to speak them, that the corruption of them spreads even from elementary entanglement. The idea of dabbling slightly, and then we go back to the idea of sin with the little leaven, leaven the whole lump. So there is dangers in this. Don't play with fire. Exodus 23 and 14. 3 times in the year you shall keep a feast to me. 23 and 15. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the month of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. None shall appear before me empty-handed. We looked at the Feast of Unleavened Bread a couple of chapters ago. It was when the Egyptians were making it out of Egypt and they didn't have time to prepare anything, time to get ready. So they didn't have their bread ready to go, so they were forced to eat unleavened bread. And it's to kind of be a remembrance of that time. Of course, when you're going to celebrate, don't come empty-handed. Exodus 23:16. Also you shall keep the Feast of Harvest, Pentecost, acknowledging the first fruits of your toil, of what you sow in the field. And third, you shall keep the Feast of Ingathering, booths or tabernacles, at the end of the year, when you gather in the fruit of your labors from the field. So the Feast of Pentecost is very significant. We'll look at that more later on, especially in the New Testament. It's very significant when it comes to the crucifixion, and there's a whole bunch of symbology and stuff going on there. It is a very significant feast that deserves multiple videos on its own. The Booth of Tabernacles, don't know as much about that one, but I'm sure it's pretty significant. It's mentioned here as being one of the 3 mandatory feasts that the Israelites will have to observe. And it's kind of like a harvest festival to celebrate the year of getting through and having the food ready and the first fruits. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on there. Exodus 23:17. 3 times in the year all your males shall appear before the Lord God. So these 3 feasts, the Jewish male is to come home for these feasts. It's similar to the idea of coming home for Christmas. That during these feasts, these men, they need to come back to Jerusalem, although we don't have Jerusalem yet. They need to be in the presence of God during these feasts or whatever it is. So that's what we got going on there. Exodus 23:18. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, neither shall the fat of my feast remain all night until morning. So first we have the forbidding of the leaven. God does not like leaven. A little leaven, leaven the whole lump. So if one person showed up with some leavened bread, they'd all show up with leavened bread. And that'd be very troublesome. But it's more so the metaphor with the leaven being similar to sin. The little bit of sin corrupts entirely, and that's just not something God's a fan of. So it's forbidden from being a part of his feasts. And then we go into the second part with the fat. No fat shall remain in the morning. So when they're partying, they're having their feast, they need to eat all the food, cook it all up, so it's all gone and done. No leftovers at the feast. Nothing going to waste. Exodus 23:19. The first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. It is interesting here that God is going to accept the first fruit from what is grown from the ground to be brought to the Lord. We think of Cain when he brought whatever fruit or plants or whatever he brought to God. I wonder if he didn't bring his first fruit but brought something else instead, and maybe there was more to that story than we initially saw. Although it really does fit in line with the idea that without the shedding of blood there is no remission of sin, and it's not really a sacrifice unless it costs something. So we'll get into that more later on. That stuff's kind of interesting. So the second part here, we have the you shall not boil the kid in its mother's milk. And if you ever meet any Jewish people, they don't eat dairy and meat in the same meal. And the reason why they don't do that, it comes from this scripture right here. Milk, which is a fluid that is used to sustain and nurture the growth of the young. And then we have the perversion of the milk being used as the method of boiling the child in its mother's milk. And that's kind of a little bit of a weird thing. The people of Israel are to be set apart. They're not supposed to be the same as the worldly people, so that's why this act is forbidden. And the Jewish people, they've taken this as a type and they've expanded it to the point that they don't consume dairy and meat in the same meal. Exodus 23 and 20. Behold, I send an angel before you to keep and guard you on the way and to bring you out to the place I have prepared. Looks like we're back to the journey at hand, and God has sent an angel to lead the way, to guide the path, to lead Moses and the Israelites to where they need to go. Exodus 23 and 21. Give heed to him, listen to and obey his voice. Be not rebellious before him or provoke him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. So we have this angel that's going to lead them down the way, and they are to listen to this angel and obey what he says. And if they don't listen, well, there will be consequences. Exodus 23:23. When my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I reject them and blot them out. So Moses is getting a little bit of a pep talk here, informing him of the different groups of people they're going to encounter and what he needs to do to get through this, and how he needs to brief the people so that they're able to overcome this trial that they're about to encounter on their journey to the promised land. Exodus 23:24. You shall not bow down to their gods or serve them or do after their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break down their pillars and images. 23:25. You shall serve the Lord your God. He shall bless your bread and water, and I will take sickness from your midst. So the Israelites are to go on this journey, and they're not to worship these other gods of these other peoples. And when they see their images, their statues and whatnot, they're to tear them down and destroy them. And the Lord's going to bless and look after them. He's going to make sure that they have good bread and water, and that they don't get sick. They don't have malaria while they're trying to go on their journey. Exodus 23:26. None shall lose her young by miscarriage, or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. So the Israelites, they're making this difficult journey, and they have a lot of enemies ahead of them. Very stressful. But the women aren't going to miscarry, for God is going to protect them so that they don't miscarry. And they're not going to be barren either. Sometimes in very stressful scenarios, the ability to procreate, it doesn't work very well. So God's going to be looking after that aspect. And then we have the third part of this, which is, I will fulfill the number of your days. So this blessing and what we saw in the couple previous sentences is going to go on, presumably for the lifespan of Moses. Exodus 23:27. I will send my terror before you, and will throw into confusion all the people to whom you shall come, and I will make all your foes turn from you in flight. So the Lord is going to use some sort of operation or intervention with all these different groups of people that they're going to be encountering, so that they're going to flee and they're not even going to battle the Israelites in combat. Exodus 23 and 28. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. So here we have biological warfare, God using the hornets to attack these people and to drive them away. Exodus 23 and 29. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate for the lack of attention, and the wild beast multiply against you. So God's going to drive them out, but he's not going to drive them out immediately, because if he drives them out too soon, then the land's going to be overcome, and then they're going to be met with a different set of problems, having to deal with the wild animals, which will reproduce and kind of take over the area. So that's kind of neat. Exodus 23 and 30. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and are numerous enough to take possession of the land. So Israel doesn't have enough people to take over the land at this point in time. So God's going to slowly drive these people out, for they don't have the ability to take it all over at once. And we saw that God is helping with the process by preventing miscarriages and not letting the women be barren. So they'll be reproducing like crazy. It'll increase the numbers of the Israelites by the time they get to the location they want to be in. Which is really kind of crazy when you think about it. You have this group of people wandering around in the wilderness on this journey, and they're like multiplying at the same time. Like, that's crazy. How can you have a culture reproduce and multiply while on the move like that? That's got to be pretty intense. I mean, yeah, I guess there's groups of, like, what do you call that, nomads or whatever it is, where they kind of move around and they don't really have a home or whatever, but it's not a journey like this. That's something more like moving to where the food is and whatnot. So it's not as tremendous as this giant group of people here. This is crazy. Exodus 21:31. I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Red Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. I don't know how big of a place this is, but that sounds like a tremendous amount of land. A very, very large area. That's also a lot of people that are going to have to leave the area so that the Israelites will be able to possess the land. So they'll be going through their own little exodus. It'll be a little bit different than the one that God is leading here with Moses and the Israelites. They'll be running for hornets. Oh, where can we go? Where are we going to be safe? The hornets are coming. And then you have the terrors too. It's like people are having these dreams that are just like, I got to get out of here. This is just not going to be good. There's going to be trouble afoot. We need to get out of here. We need to go to the land of Magog or something, right? Exodus 23:32. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. The Israelites on this journey, they're going to be interacting with some of these people. They're supposed to be driving them out, but they're going to interact with them. And God forbids them from making covenants or deals with these people or their gods. He wants them to be separate and distinct. He doesn't want them falling under the rules of this other group of people or whatever. For if they do make a covenant with them and they do make an oath with them, God would expect them to keep that oath. So it's very dangerous to be like that. For how could they be the people of God if they're just a bunch of liars, right? If you make an oath, you need to keep the oath, even if it's incredibly painful. Exodus 23:33. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Some of these rules and some of these things that God is outlining, it's almost like a prophecy, is it's like, oh, he doesn't want them to do this. Well, what's going to happen when they do that? Well, we'll see. And we'll see just how much of a mess and how bad circumstances can be when they don't listen to God and they start doing some of these things. But for now, God is just instructing them. And it's not really supposed to be a prophecy of all the different ways the Israelites are going to mess up and screw things up and make life much more difficult for themselves due to not being obedient to God. So we're at the end of the chapter now. So they're in the process of moving again. The rules have kind of been spelled out. And we have this angel, the angel with the name of the Lord in his name. Could this be the avatar of God, that God himself is leaving them? I don't know. He's got a lot of authority, this angel, though, so we'll see what happens there.